Listen, I have seen a lot of weird things in my 17 cycles as a xenobiologist for the Galactic Science Collective. I have watched brilliant scholars debate the philosophical implications of quantum foam for 6 hours straight without blinking. I have observed Corthian engineers build a spaceship out of what I can only describe as angry mathematics and pure spite. I have even attended a conference where a Gelix professor presented a paper on temporal mechanics while simultaneously existing in 3 different time periods, which was, frankly, showing off. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for Dr. Mira Kade. The human walked into Research Station Omega-5 on a Tuesday. Well, what we call Tuesday. Humans have this bizarre obsession with naming every single rotation of their planet, as if the universe cares about their scheduling conflicts. She arrived on Transport Vessel 447, carrying exactly 1 bag, wearing what appeared to be cloth coverings that looked like they had been assembled by someone who deeply resented the concept of formal attire. I was standing in the main observatory when she entered. The doors slid open with their usual pneumatic hiss, and there she was. Small by human standards, maybe 5 feet and 4 inches in their primitive measurement system. Dark hair pulled back in what I later learned was called a ponytail, though I saw no actual pony and was deeply disappointed. Her eyes were brown, unremarkable, the kind of eyes that suggested she had seen things and filed them away in neat mental folders labeled, "Deal with this later." Commander Thrace, our station director, a Voltharian with more medals than sense, stood at attention. His 3 primary arms clasped behind his back, his translator chip humming softly. "Dr. Kade," Thrace boomed in that way Voltharians do when they want everyone in a 5-mile radius to know they are important. "Welcome to Research Station Omega-5. We are honored to have a representative from Earth joining our xenobiology division." Mira looked around the observatory with an expression I could not quite categorize. Not impressed. Not unimpressed. Just observing. Taking notes without writing anything down. "Thanks," she said. Just that. Thanks. Not, "Thank you for this tremendous opportunity," or, "I am humbled to be here among such distinguished colleagues." Just thanks, delivered with the enthusiasm of someone acknowledging that yes, gravity still works. Thrace blinked, all 6 of his eyes cycling through confusion. Your quarters are on level 7. Dr. Paxson here will show you around." He gestured at me with his middle arm, the one he typically reserved for pointing at things he found vaguely distasteful. I stepped forward, extending my primary manipulator appendage in what I hoped was a welcoming gesture. Humans shake hands, right? I had done my research. Spent 3 whole hours watching human interaction videos. I was prepared. Mira shook my hand. Her grip was firm, warm. Humans are disturbingly warm. Like little mobile furnaces wrapped in skin. "Dr. Vrel Paxson," I introduced myself. "Xenobiology, comparative anatomy, occasional dabbler in xenobotany when the mood strikes." "Mira," she replied. "Molecular biology, genetics, professional coffee addict." Coffee. Right. The human stimulant beverage that smells like burnt dirt and broken promises. I had heard about this. Apparently, humans consume it in quantities that would kill most carbon-based life forms, and they do this willingly. Enthusiastically, even. I led her through the station corridors, pointing out the dining facilities, the recreation areas, the emergency evacuation pods that we definitely hoped nobody would ever need to use. She nodded at appropriate intervals, asked reasonable questions about atmospheric controls and gravitational settings. "So," I ventured as we stepped into the lift toward level 7, "what brings you to Omega-5? We do not get many human researchers out this far." "Curiosity," she said simply. I waited for elaboration. None came. "Curiosity about what, specifically?" "Everything." "Excellent. I was working with a human philosopher. Just what every xenobiology division needed." Her quarters were standard issue. 15 by 20 feet, adjustable environmental controls, a sleeping platform, a workspace with a data terminal, and a window overlooking the beautiful endless void of space. Mira walked in, set her bag down with a soft thump, and immediately went to the window. "Nice view," she murmured. "It is space," I pointed out helpfully. "Mostly empty. Very dark. Occasionally murderous." She smiled at that. Small, brief, like she was rationing her amusement for a long winter. The first week passed unremarkably. Mira showed up to the lab at 0600 hours station time. She stayed until 2200 hours. She drank coffee in amounts that concerned me professionally and personally. She barely spoke during team meetings, just listened with that same evaluating expression, like she was watching a play and trying to figure out which actor would mess up their lines first. Our current project involved studying the cellular structure of Thraxian moss, a particularly aggressive form of vegetation that had been terrorizing agricultural colonies in the outer rim. The moss had this delightful habit of dissolving standard containment materials and occasionally achieving something resembling sentience, which made it both fascinating and deeply irritating. Dr. Kellen Trace, a Rig alien with a superiority complex the size of a small moon, ran most of the team meetings. He had been with the station for 9 cycles and never let anyone forget it. The problem, Kellen announced during one particularly tedious briefing, his mandibles clicking with self-satisfaction, is that we are approaching this from a conventional biological framework. We need to think beyond standard cellular analysis. "Have you tried asking the moss nicely to stop being aggressive?" Mira asked from the back of the room. Everyone turned. She had not spoken in 3 days. We had started to wonder if she had taken a vow of silence. Kellen's mandibles stopped clicking. "Excuse me. I am just saying, maybe the moss has reasons. Motivations. Perhaps it is simply misunderstood." I could not tell if she was serious. Her expression remained completely neutral, like a statue dedicated to the concept of deadpan delivery. Kellen sputtered. Actual sputtering, like a broken atmospheric processor. "That is, Dr. Kade, that is not how biology works." "Isn't it though?" She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "I mean, humans spent centuries assuming plants were basically passive organisms. Then we discovered they communicate through mycorrhizal networks, release chemical signals, even exhibit memory-like responses. Maybe your moss is just really, really good at expressing its feelings." Several researchers laughed nervously. Kellen looked like he wanted to file a formal complaint with the universe. After the meeting, I cornered Mira near the coffee dispenser. She was, unsurprisingly, getting coffee. "Did you actually mean that? About the moss having feelings?" She took a long sip from her cup, steam curling up past her face. "Maybe. Maybe not. But Kellen has been running the same analysis protocols for 6 months with zero progress. Sometimes you need to poke the paradigm a little. See what falls out." That night, at approximately 0300 hours, the lab exploded. Well, not exploded exactly. More like suddenly became very bright and made sounds that the human language inadequately describes as whooshing and crackling and, "Oh God, what is happening?" I was asleep in my quarters when the alarms went off. Proximity alerts, containment breach warnings, the general symphony of things going catastrophically wrong. I threw on my lab coat, which I realized too late was inside out, and sprinted toward the xenobiology wing. The corridors were chaos. Researchers running in multiple directions, none of them helpful. Emergency lighting casting everything in aggressive red tones. And smoke. So much smoke, pouring out of Lab 7 like the universe had decided to start vaping. I skidded around the corner and found Mira standing outside the lab doors. Just standing there, covered in some kind of luminescent substance that glowed soft blue in the emergency lighting. Her hair had escaped its ponytail and stuck out at angles that defied at least 3 laws of physics. "What did you do?" I demanded, coming to a halt beside her. "Science," she replied calmly. Science does not typically involve this much smoke. Good science does. Commander Thrace arrived moments later, all three arms waving in agitation. Someone explain to me why Lab 7 is glowing. I can answer that, Mira said, still eerily calm. I isolated a bioluminescent compound from the Thraxian moss and introduced it to a sample of Kelrath algae to see if cross-species genetic expression was possible between organisms from different quadrants. Thrace stared at her. I stared at her. A small maintenance drone beeped past us, also seemingly staring. And Thrace finally managed. It worked. The smoke began clearing, pulled away by the station's ventilation systems. Through the lab windows, we could see the interior. Every surface was covered in moss, but not the aggressive gray-green Thraxian variety we had been studying. This moss glowed, pulsing with soft blue light, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost beautiful. It is communicating, Mira said quietly, pressing one hand against the window. Look at the patterns. That is not random bioluminescence. That is information transfer. I looked closer. She was right. The pulses of light were moving in waves, coordinated, like neurons firing in a vast biological computer. Impossible, Kellen whispered from somewhere behind us. Cross-species genetic integration does not work that way. The DNA structures are completely incompatible. Apparently, Mira said, turning to face him with a smile that was absolutely not smug but somehow felt smug anyway, they just needed the right introduction. The next 6 hours were a blur. Containment teams, sample collections, emergency briefings with station command. The moss continued its light show, patterns growing more complex. Other researchers started running analyses, pulling data, arguing in at least 4 different languages about what this meant. Mira sat at a terminal in the corner, typing rapidly, occasionally sipping from a coffee cup that I am 90% certain she had been carrying for 8 hours straight without refilling. I pulled up a chair beside her. You know this is going to change everything, right? If we can facilitate genetic exchange between species from different worlds, the applications are enormous, she finished. Terrifying. Potentially catastrophic. Yeah, I thought about that. And you did it anyway? She stopped typing, turned to look at me with those unremarkable brown eyes that suddenly seemed remarkably sharp. Dr. Paxson, do you know what the greatest trait of humanity is? The thing that got us from living in caves to building starships? Opposable thumbs? Curiosity. She smiled. Dangerous, stupid, beautiful curiosity. We are not the strongest species. We are not the smartest. But we really, really want to know what happens when you push the button labeled "Do Not Push." That seems problematic. Oh, it absolutely is. She turned back to her terminal. But it is also how we got here. How I got here. And frankly, I think the universe needs a little more problematic curiosity. It keeps things interesting. The moss pulsed again, waves of blue light cascading across its surface like a heartbeat. Like something waking up. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in that part of every scientist that loves and fears the unknown in equal measure, I realized that Mira Kade was not just a researcher who had walked quietly into our lab. She was a storm wearing a lab coat. And she had only just begun. The thing about storms is that they do not ask permission before they change the landscape. They simply arrive, do their work, and leave you standing in the aftermath wondering what just happened and whether your insurance covers acts of scientific revolution. Mira Kade was that kind of storm. 3 days after the incident, which station records officially labeled as unplanned biological luminescence event, and which everyone else called the time the human made glowing moss, the xenobiology division looked like someone had shaken it like a snow globe and forgotten to put it down. The glowing moss, which Mira had started calling Gerald for reasons she refused to explain, now occupied 4 separate containment units. Each one pulsed with coordinated light patterns that our best AI systems were still trying to decode. Kellen had stopped insisting it was impossible and moved directly into the anger stage of scientific grief. "This violates everything we know about genetic compatibility," he shouted during the morning briefing, his mandibles clicking so fast they sounded like malfunctioning typewriters. "DNA from species that evolved light years apart should not be able to integrate. It is like trying to run Volfarian software on a Rig-Alien operating system." Unless, Mira said from her position near the back wall where she had apparently decided to live permanently, the fundamental code is more universal than we thought. Maybe DNA is not as species-specific as we assumed. Maybe it is more like a language, and we just needed to find the right translation. I watched Kellen's face cycle through 17 different shades of purple. Impressive, considering Rigelians typically only manage 12. "That is not how molecular biology works, Dr. Kade." "Sure it is," she replied, taking a sip of coffee that had probably achieved consciousness by now. "I just did it. In Lab 7. With Moss named Gerald. Reality seems pretty on board with my interpretation." Commander Thrace raised one of his primary hands, which was his way of saying everyone should shut up before he made it an official command. "Regardless of the theoretical implications, we need to understand what we are dealing with. Dr. Kade, you have had the most contact with the organism. What can you tell us?" Mira straightened, and I noticed for the first time that she had dark circles under her eyes that suggested sleep was a theoretical concept she had heard about once. "Gerald is not aggressive like standard Thraxian moss. The bioluminescent genes from the Kelrath algae seem to have modified its behavior. It is expending energy on communication rather than expansion." "Communication with what?" asked Dr. Lynn Ferris, a Centaurian biochemist with 3 PhDs and a permanent expression of skeptical concern. "With itself, primarily. The light patterns suggest internal network activity. But there is more." Mira pulled up a holographic display, and suddenly we were looking at streams of data that made my head hurt. I had been running frequency analysis on the light pulses. They matched neural oscillation patterns. Specifically, they matched the patterns associated with conscious thought. The room went very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone suggests something so fundamentally absurd that everyone needs a moment to process whether they heard it correctly. "You are saying the moss is thinking," Thrace said slowly. "I am saying the moss is doing something that looks remarkably like thinking. Whether that qualifies as consciousness by our definition is a philosophical question I am not qualified to answer. But yes, Gerald appears to have some form of cognitive activity." Kellen laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone watching their worldview crumble in real time and deciding to find it funny or go completely insane. "Next you will tell us it wants to file a research grant." "Actually," Mira said, pulling up another display, "it has been trying to communicate with me." That got everyone's attention. The new hologram showed a time-lapse recording of Gerald over the past 72 hours. The light patterns were not random. They followed sequences, repeated motifs, variations on themes. It looked like language. It looked like someone tapping on a wall in the dark, hoping someone would tap back. "I have been responding," Mira continued. "Using a modified laser array to send light pulses back. Simple patterns at first. Binary sequences, mathematical progressions. And it responds. It learns. It adapts its patterns to match the complexity of what I send." "This is insane," someone muttered from the back. "This is science," Mira corrected. "Insane is just what we call it before we understand it." I found myself standing. If what you are saying is true, if Gerald is genuinely exhibiting conscious behavior, then we are not looking at a biological specimen. We are looking at a first contact scenario. "With moss," Kellen added flatly. "With intelligent moss," Mira emphasized. "And before anyone says it, yes, I understand the implications. Yes, this changes everything. Yes, we should proceed carefully. But also, how cool is this? We made first contact with a new form of consciousness, and it happened in Lab 7 on a Tuesday because I got bored and decided to mix some genetic material together. Trace pinched the bridge of his nose, or at least the Voltharian equivalent. This needs to go up the chain. The Galactic Science Collective will want to know. The Ethics Committee will definitely want to know. We might need to involve the First Contact Division. Can I keep working with Gerald? Mira asked. Absolutely not. I am going to keep working with Gerald. Dr. Kade. Commander, with respect, I just created a potentially sentient organism through unprecedented genetic integration. I am the closest thing we have to an expert on this situation. Also, Gerald seems to like me. How can you possibly know that? It spells my name in light patterns every morning at 0600 hours. Silence. Again. The universe was getting really good at dramatic pauses. Trace sighed, a sound like air escaping from a punctured spacesuit. Fine. Continue your research. But you will have a supervisor present at all times, full documentation of every experiment, and if that moss starts spelling anything concerning, you shut it down immediately. Define concerning, Mira said. Use your judgment, Dr. Kade. Oh good, my favorite instruction. Over the next week, I was assigned as Mira's supervisor, which was hilarious because supervising Mira Kade was like supervising a hurricane. You could watch it, document it, but controlling it was completely off the table. We spent hours in Lab 7, now completely overtaken by Gerald, which had grown to cover most surfaces in a carpet of softly glowing moss. It was beautiful in a deeply unsettling way. The patterns had grown more complex, cascading across the walls like living data streams. Good morning, Gerald, Mira said as we entered one morning, speaking to the moss like it was a colleague she ran into at the coffee machine. The moss pulsed in response, a ripple of light that started at one corner and spread across the entire room. See? Likes me, she said, shooting me a look of vindication. Or it is preparing to dissolve you at a molecular level. You say that like those are mutually exclusive. She approached the primary growth, where Gerald was thickest, and placed her hand against it. The moss responded immediately, light concentrating beneath her palm like it was reaching back. I have been teaching it concepts, Mira explained. Abstract ideas. Mathematics was easy. Physics took longer. But yesterday, I tried something different. I showed it images of Earth. My home. And it showed me something back. She pulled up a recording on her data pad. The moss had arranged its bioluminescence into patterns that looked almost pictorial. Vague shapes, landscapes, structures. Memories, maybe, of wherever the Thraxian moss had originated before it became a problem for agricultural colonies. It is homesick, I realized. Maybe. Or maybe it is just trying to connect. To say, I understand, I also came from somewhere. Either way, we are not just looking at intelligence here. We are looking at emotion. Empathy. All the things we associate with higher consciousness. I sat down heavily on a nearby stool that probably was not rated for my species but supported me anyway. Mira, do you understand what you have done? You have not just created a new organism. You have potentially created a new form of life. A new person. I know, she said softly, and for the first time since she arrived, I heard uncertainty in her voice. I have been thinking about that. About responsibility. About what it means to create something that can think and feel. It is terrifying. But you are going to keep going. Of course I am. That is what scientists do. We push forward into the terrifying unknown because someone has to. Because the universe is big and strange and full of questions, and sitting around being scared does not answer any of them. Gerald pulsed again, patterns flowing like water, like thought, like something that was alive in ways we were only beginning to understand. Besides, Mira added with that small rationed smile, I think Gerald wants to learn more. And I really want to teach it. There is so much we can show each other. The final report to the Galactic Science Collective took 6 weeks to compile. It included testimony from 17 different researchers, ethical reviews from 4 separate committees, and approximately 700 pages of documentation proving that yes, a human had walked into our lab and accidentally created sentient moss. The response from the collective came back on a Friday. They were sending a delegation. Gerald was to be recognized as a new form of sapient life, subject to all protections and rights therein. Mira was being cited for both groundbreaking achievement and catastrophically irresponsible laboratory procedure. She would receive a commendation and a formal reprimand, which seemed to perfectly sum up the entire situation. I found her in Lab 7, as usual, having what appeared to be a conversation with the walls. "They are coming to take Gerald away," I said. "Well, not away. But to a proper facility. One designed for sapient beings, not aggressive vegetation." "I know," she said. "Gerald told me." "Gerald told you." "In light patterns. It has gotten very good at communication. We had a whole discussion about it." "Well, as much of a discussion as you can have with bioluminescent moss." The moss pulsed, and I swear it looked amused. "Are you okay with this? Letting it go?" Mira was quiet for a long moment, watching the patterns flow across the walls like thoughts across a mind. "You know what Commander Thrace said to me yesterday? He said I walked into this lab quietly and nobody noticed until everything exploded with discovery. Like it was an accident. Like I stumbled into greatness. Did you not?" She turned, and there was fire in those unremarkable brown eyes. "Dr. Paxson, I walked into this lab knowing exactly what I was doing. I saw a problem everyone else was stuck on, and I decided to approach it differently. I took a risk. I pushed boundaries. I made something impossible happen because somebody had to, and it might as well be me. That is very human of you." "Damn right it is. We are not the strongest, not the smartest, but we refuse to accept that something cannot be done just because it has not been done before. That is our gift to the universe. Dangerous, stupid, beautiful curiosity that makes moss think and galaxies wonder what we will do next." Gerald pulsed brightly, a cascade of light that felt like applause. "So yes, I am okay with letting Gerald go. Because this is not an ending. It is a beginning. For Gerald, for xenobiology, for every researcher who looks at an impossible problem and thinks, well, let us see what happens." The delegation arrived 3 days later. They brought proper containment equipment, xenopsychologists, and enough paperwork to classify a small moon. Gerald was transferred carefully, ceremoniously, to a transport vessel designed for sapient beings. As they prepared to leave, the moss spelled out one final message in light. "Thank you, Mira." She smiled, that small carefully rationed smile, but I noticed her eyes were bright. "Anytime, Gerald. Anytime." After they left, the lab felt empty. Too quiet. Missing something that had become part of its ecosystem. But Mira did not stay quiet long. "So," she said, pulling up a new project file on her terminal, "I have been thinking about Vrelian neural networks and Centaurian biotech. What do you think happens if we introduce adaptive AI proteins into organic memory cells?" I stared at her. "Mira, no. Mira, yes. We just spent 6 weeks dealing with the fallout from your last experiment." "Exactly. I have experience now. This will go much smoother. You created sentient moss. And next I will create something even better. That is how science works, Dr. Paxson. You take what you learned, and you push further. The universe does not give points for playing it safe." She was already pulling up genetic sequences, running simulations, that look of focused intensity returning to her face. I sighed. "I am going to need more coffee for this, am I not?" "So much coffee," she agreed cheerfully. "Also, maybe we should clear the other labs. Just in case." "In case of what?" "In case of science." And as alarms began their now familiar song and emergency protocols activated with practiced efficiency, I realized something fundamental about humans, about Mira Kade specifically, about the way they approached the universe with reckless abandon and infectious enthusiasm. They were not going to stop. They were never going to stop. They would keep pushing, keep experimenting, keep walking quietly into labs and making them explode with discovery until the entire galaxy was lit up with impossible things that became possible because someone refused to accept the word no. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was absolutely going to give me a stress-induced molt. But as I watched Mira work, humming something that might have been music or might have been her brain processing too much caffeine, I found myself smiling. Because the universe was big and strange and full of questions. And humanity had arrived with answers nobody asked for and chaos nobody ordered. And honestly, I could not wait to see what they would break next.